So in many of my classes, we talk about sort of the technical side of machine learning art, but a theme of sort of the next year for me, as well as the channel, as well as my classes, is I really want to get more in touch with sort of the artistic side of this work and talk about, beyond just like how do you build this stuff, how do you actually like take a vision you have and utilize the tools you have. So with that in mind, I wanted to walk through some inspirational materials of machine learning or things that I've been inspired by over the years, or especially this year or whatever, and just sort of like maybe provide folks with some additional projects they maybe haven't seen before or might spark some influence in their own work. So, as I mentioned, like so many if you watch any of my videos before, you've taken any of my classes, you know that like we definitely focus more on techniques and the technical side of like how to actually like set up a data set, how to run it, that sort of thing. Um, and I think it's important for me to just outright mention, like, I don't think that that's the artwork, right? The art is more your vision and what you're trying to say with the various pieces. And techniques help get you there. And for a long time, I've sort of have been like hands off on like, you know, you do what you want to do, and here's how to do it. And so these two things I think oftentimes get inflated in machine learning art. A lot of times, like, here's a new model. That means like we all jump on it and we all make new artwork with it. And well, I think there's certain value in that. I think it's hard for me to see that as like all that ML art has to offer, right? Like, I think no one says, "Oh, look at the painting you did," and "Oh, you used a new." Well, I guess some people do this. Nobody should say, "Oh, you used a new paint or a new color," and therefore like that makes your work valuable. Um, you know, Painting or other more traditional media arts are valuable because of the work. And that's what I want to influence or like to talk about here. Um, and also, like, I probably shared this quote with everyone before. You've seen me talk about it before, but I think Alison Parrish's quote about this of like asking, "Can a computer generate Shakespeare to me?" is less interesting than, e.g., "What would Gertrude Stein have made with TensorFlow?" Um, so again, I'm not necessarily particularly personally interested in art automation or like the automation of or removing of humans in an art artifact. Lots of people are interested in that topic. I think there's better places to get ideas from that than me. I'm particularly interested in this, which is like how do we provide machine learning tools to artists to help facilitate their vision and or alter their vision and or uh, change how machine learning works or could be viewed once people see how artists work with it. So yeah, with that, also some notes about this particular talk. I hate the idea of canons in artistic media, so please don't consider this one. My views on most of this artwork change day to day or year to year, and this is not a fixed vision of what I think the future of machine learning art will be. Um, Quite honestly, this is just stuff I'm into right now or stuff I remembered in putting in this work, and that's pretty bad, and I admit it. And I'm going to work on doing a better job of sort of maintaining this as I go and as we talk more about this work. Um, Also, because it's things that I'm into right now, it ends up being very Western, in part because it's hard for me to get access to non-English machine learning materials. And admittedly, it's very white. Um, Part of that is because I think machine learning as a whole is a very white industry, but that's not to say that I'm not guilty of having some bias in this. And this is something I definitely want to work on more. I've added some new material in here from artists of color, who I already respect and have always loved, and I just it's a bias that I didn't put them in here previously. And lastly, I think like if you're familiar with projects that are not Western or not white, and you want to share them with me, please do. I'm so happy to like see new work and see new views or new points of view on machine learning. And also like with a lot of these categories I'm going to talk through, like I would love pushback from you. So like don't feel free to yell at me. Is basically what I'm saying here. Like this is a work in progress for me, and I'm really happy to sort of see it change and find more artists whose work I can share. So with that, let's jump into some categories. So I've broken these up into sort of quite honestly, very random categories, but just some things that I think about or things other folks have talked about. The first is psychedelia. I think this is like top of mind for most people when they look at machine learning art. They're like, man, that looks trippy, or that looks weird, or that looks like the last time I took drugs. And I think it's a pretty common part of machine learning art. So, um, Alexander Mormantsev, who's the creator of Deep Dream, like Deep Dream, I think was like very much one of the first things that really felt like psychedelic in machine learning art. This is actually some of his style transfer work. This is, again, there's sort of this like 3D aspect to the psychedelia, and I think you know it's definitely a part of the process. I think what's really interesting to me is actually think about like how do machines see, and the fact that they sometimes see psychedelic things is pretty interesting to me. This is pretty recent work from Ryan Murdoch, who's been doing a lot by connecting clip to various image generation techniques like Big GAN, or this might be Siren, I forget. He's also been working with DALI recently. So again, it's sort of like this is text that is reinterpreted as some psychedelic imagery. And I'm not an expert on psychedelics by any means. Hi, mom. And but I think there's a lot of value to this sort of work, and I think it's again, it's is this computer art? Is it psychedelic art? Where's the overlap between the two? What are you saying with this work? When you talk about machines seeing things in psychedelic ways, is really interesting to me. What was this supposed to be? Oh, this is some of my own work. um, but I also think like there is a natural psychedelic view of this, like that isn't just purely like trippy colors, right? Like just the way that StyleGAN manipulates imagery and video like makes it feel somewhat trippy as well. And I think that that's like a valuable thing to think about is not just like how do you maximize on the drug use feeling of things, but also like how do you bring that into the work. And clearly my internet is a little slow, and therefore videos are a little bad in terms of loading. So I think alongside psychedelics is also this idea of surrealism, and they can be hard to disentangle. I think sometimes I sort of see surrealism as more of a dream state, whereas I think psychedelia is pretty clearly sort of the hippie vision of bright colors and things swirling and that sort of thing. I also think surrealism has a tie to like even some history sort of feeling. Like I love this work from Sylvia Crespo. Um, it's her StyleGAN work that is then printed as cyanotypes, and again, it adds to that dreaminess factor of these things by printing them in an old material. I think Mario Klingemann is definitely one of those people who works a lot in this area. So you can see like just the way these faces sort of morph in and out. I guess there's maybe a little bit of that liquid sense that I think maybe like Salvador Dali has brought to surrealism, which maybe isn't what most surrealism is about, but I think it's an interesting place of overlap. And this is some work from a former student of mine, Adam, although I think he was doing this before he joined my classes. But Adam has these stained glass pieces, and then he runs them through a 3D renderer. And again, I think it adds to this level of dreaminess. And again, one of the things you'll see me reinforce throughout many of these materials is taking a thing that is a GAN or a machine generated work and then bringing it into your own process that is not just purely machine learning. So I think it's a valuable thing to think about. And Memos Learning to See is hands down one of my favorite pieces of all time. If you haven't seen this, I'm not going to go through all 3 minutes of it, but I highly, highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite pieces because it generates this very dreamlike effect, but you also sort of see behind the scenes, sort of like showing how the magic works, which I think actually makes it feel more magical in a way, which is kind of uncommon for a lot of things. So I'll share the slide deck of this as well in the video description, but I'd highly recommend checking out this work because it's just really amazing and really fascinating to sort of watch these two pieces side by side. Cubism. So you'll see I'm like going through like the early history of modern art. But I do think that Cubism actually plays a really strong role in some of this work. One way to think about this is that as a data set, right? So let's say you have thousands and thousands of images, all of different angles or all of different perspectives. When you bring them into a model, the model doesn't always read them as these are different perspectives, right? It's trying to flatten those. And when you flatten things in perspective, like you create like a cubist sort of vision for work. So this is both like in the output, but also just in purely the way that these processes work. You can imagine them as sort of a cubist mind state. This is work of my student John Gall recently. He took some Met sculptures and ran them through Runway, I believe. And you'll just see that like many of these sculptures look pretty similar, but then you get these really beautiful sort of like distorted things where there's a face in many different perspectives. Part of this is because these sculptures are both viewed from like almost like on a dolly. So there's sort of and there's said like 3 different versions that all sound like dolly today. Sorry, transcriber. um, where you've got the front view, two side views, and a back view, and the model tries to merge those in a way that it can coherently describe, but then a human sees it and is like, that looks really weird. So again, this idea of how machines see versus how we see, and the difference between those two, I think is really interesting and a place to extrapolate or explore more. I found this project, I believe, on the NeurIP site. I just really liked it. I think there's really interesting architectural perspectives here. Again, this almost so maybe feels more like collage, but you get this multiple different points of view as you walk through work. Kishi Yuma is another one of these the designers or artists that I feel like really works with this sense. These have some body horror aspect to them, but I also think it's like you can imagine these as different points in time, right? So Cubism is maybe not just different perspectives on the same image, but a different point in time being merged together. And I think Kishi's work really covers that in fine detail. So I briefly talked about collage. I think collage, again, if you think about Cubism as multiple angles or multiple viewpoints being put into a model and sort of combined and squished, you also think about collage as like multiple data sets, multiple types of images combined into a model. And maybe collage isn't purely just multiple images at one time on a page, but it could even be thought of as different images in different periods of time being combined. I think Helena Sarin is like one of the leaders of sort of this type of work, and I really appreciate them. Her work and she has sort of a unique vision and a unique approach to machine learning art. It honestly feels kind of like limiting for me to call her as just a digital collagist, but I think it's sort of maybe an easy way to look at her work. Helena works with small data sets and mostly with her own work, her own photographs, her own paintings, and she sort of pushes them through a machine in like these very interesting combinatorial ways, and you just get this really interesting vision of different images overlaid over each other. One of the things I think, again, if we tie this to the technical side of this, somehow this is tricking I believe it's a StyleGAN machine into thinking that this is one image or this is a translated image that works. So it's really interesting to think about how collage is, maybe for the human brain, a way of tricking people into multiple images being one. This is a way of tricking a machine into believing multiple images are one image. Mike Taika, does a lot of work. I think he was well known as a deep dream person, but he also did a lot with with style transfer. And you can sort of see in this image here, it's got all those tropes of early, 20th century modern art. But it also takes on collage. And I think style transfer is another one of those areas where it's kind of underdeveloped and could be more collage-like or less collage-like depending on how you approach it. And lastly, I want to show this project from Joel Simon and Tal Shiri that is literally collage, and literally collage from having, using different parts of a machine learning model. So I believe the idea here is that it's taking GAN breeder images, which is one of Joel Simon's projects, and it's turning them into collage pieces, and then it sort of jitters this collage until it actually generates a face that a machine learning model says, yep, that's a face, which I just think is really fascinating, and there could be a lot more work done in this area that uses like realistic or like a more physical collage approach. So as you may have seen through many of the pieces here, I think there's like definitely a body horror aspect to a lot of machine learning art. As you stick people and skins through these things, it's clear that machines don't know where bodies start and stop, and you just get a lot of these very Cronenberg-like images. So I thought I'd quickly show some work in that area. This is a project from Justin Pinkney. The idea here is that you're actually taking different layers of the StyleGAN network from different models and able to combine them. So in this case, you get sort of an uncanny valley samurai or early like pre-20th century Japanese artwork. But in other cases, you get these very interesting sort of Pixar-like images. So this is, I think in some ways projecting into one of the spaces and then applying like a Pixar 3D skin tone on top of it. Definitely uncanny valley world here. And then you've got Justin Pinkney, who's taking some of this work and applying it to illustrations. I think there's just something really nice about maybe seeing how the sausage gets made in some of these pieces, so understanding what this image is. And you can almost see how like character animation in something like a Pixar world could eventually work. So the future of these tools could be pretty powerful. And then, another really great machine learning artist is Robbie Barrett. Again, probably similar to Helena. He fits in pretty much every category if he wants to. This has worked for maybe a couple years ago now, where trying to generate that sort of like gnashing of teeth, Renaissance painting look, but with machine learning, and many of these faces become blobs or these, very skin Cronenberg monster type of things. Lots of this work out there, and I think some folks do it really well, and others, I think there's just a challenge about like how you're applying this to your own work and what the metaphor is in some ways. Scott Eaton is probably one of those artists that I wish I were more like. Scott happens to be multidisciplinary in the sense that he can work with figure drawing. He's a 3D artist. He's also a photographer. He has built all of his like most amazing data sets, and been able to sort of apply them together into this really interesting project where he can draw figures and then generate these really wonderful 3D like render systems from them. There's a link here in this deck for a video where he talks through this entire process for about an hour. Really fascinating, and really sort of helps you understand, if realism or just like something that is more photorealistic is really your goal for machine learning. He gives a lot of helpful tips on how to make sure that you're building your data sets right. And so now we're moving sort of outside of the image, how it looks into a category sort of thing, into maybe some more conceptual work, I guess, in many ways. I mean, I feel like all these projects are still quite visually beautiful, but they have some underlying metaphor to them. These are also kind of a challenge for me to find because a lot of times I don't know the full backstory of projects. So if you know of some work where there is a better backstory or something that I can talk about, I'm happy to add some work in here. We'll start with some Anna Riddler work. So this is from a couple years ago now. I feel like I'm always like dating these projects as like 3 years ago means it was forever ago, but it kind of is sometimes in machine learning art. But these are photographs that Anna Riddler took of tulips, and then she ran them through a StyleGAN model. But what I think is really, really interesting here, because I mean, the GAN itself is beautiful, right? Like seeing these flowers open and close is great. She hooked this up to a Bitcoin, to like the price of Bitcoin. And of course, the metaphor here, if you're not familiar, is the Dutch tulip craze, and how that was its own sort of form of the stock market. And you compare that to Bitcoin today, and I think she's making some interesting connections between people are always doing crazy stuff with money, and crypto coin is no different than a Dutch tulip craze, just a different material. Sorry, the other two projects in here are mine, and that's only because I have stories to tell about them. I'm sure there are a lot more artists out here doing this, and I need to do a better job of adding their work in here. This is a project I did called Extinguished. This happened during the Australian wildfires of about a year or two ago. And around that time, I had found a data set of Australian birds, and I was sort of interested in, like, what's the metaphor here? What can I be doing? So this was a translation model where during the translation process, it basically removed the birds, right? So there's left with like some skeletons, or just some, sort of ghostly layers of what the birds are left. And I thought this is sort of a beautiful metaphor for what happens with climate change, and especially what was happening with Australian wildfires at the time. So I made some prints of these, sold them, and donated the proceeds to a reclamation project for the Australian wildfires. This is another one of mine. I guess I've talked about this maybe a little bit, but I tend to find a lot of my work is beautiful on the outside and then kind of darker, like cynical on the inside. And this project's no different. This is trained on a lot of sort of modern, like sort of right around the time of Darwin. Different botanical images and that sort of thing. And while the output is certainly beautiful, I think the metaphor here is that during Darwin's time, a lot of scientists were actually like, realistically, they were just eugenicists. They were looking for ways to promote the supremacy of the Western world, and especially white men. And I think the metaphor here is like that is machine learning today too. A lot of our machine learning tools are meant to just support white men, and many of them delve into very eugenics level areas. So again, you can look at this and be like, that's a pretty flower, and then you find out what it's about, and you're like, now I feel different about the pretty flowers. So I'm interested in that, and that's definitely something I explore in my work. So another category which I think is just like maybe a little bit more lighthearted is AI is stupid or AI is comedy. Again, I think what's really nice here is that you can sort of laugh on the surface and then like kind of realize that it's doing something interesting or it's telling us an interesting story. Janelle Shane is one of the best in this category, I think. Her work is, generally pointing out how silly AI models are today, um, and but she uses that as a great metaphor for like maybe we shouldn't be relying on these things so heavily, or maybe there's other ways we can think about this. Let's see if this video will play for me. There we go. So this is a model that tries to reconstruct a scene from Star Wars. And it's really funny because it does it using segmentation or classification. And it's pretty clear that like it is not doing a good job of certain things, right? It's kind of like destroying certain parts of these images. And again, I think it's a good metaphor for like, what are machines seeing, which is a common category that we talk about, but also like, what is it reconstructing things as? Jonathan Fly is another one of these people who I feel like always pushes the boundaries of machine learning models to like the places they're not supposed to be. This is a super resolution model. The idea is that you can res an image up. And clearly what Jonathan did here is res up pixel art. And the idea is this model is trying to find realistic photos and expects realistic, downsampled images. So it tends to generate stuff like pizza with lips, or it takes a character from Doom and makes him look like he's been on quite a bender. Or taking pixel art of smiley faces and getting really creepy stuff out of it. This kind of crossed over into the body horror category, but I think it also points out to like the point, which is something that Lee and I talk a lot about, which is that these models are really meant to only do one thing, and the thing is you can either embrace that and try to work off that, or you can find the funny ways to break that model by doing what it's not expected to do. And I don't think Edges to Cats is officially like a funny project. I guess maybe some people think it's funny, but what I think was funny here was just like, the first day everyone was like making really beautiful cats, and then a day or two later, everyone was making like horror monster things out of this thing. And I guess this is funny because seeing this image is kind of hilarious, but like, it's also a good point out that like you don't always control what people do with your models, and you need to think about like what could this be. So with like Edges to Cats, it's kind of a funny usage, but if you think about how people are abusing other machine learning models, either for their own money making purposes or something worse, like it's something to consider and something to think about. So this category contains a bunch of what I would describe as critical AI projects. You can challenge whether or not you think these are artistic projects. I think many of them are, but you could also think of some of them as deep ethics research projects. Yeah. So Everest Pipkin, I love this project. It's called Lacework. They went through and watched hours of machine learning video data for a machine learning model. And I think they talk about like sort of the mundanity or the mundaneness, I don't know which word you can use there, of sort of these data sets, but also like if someone had to watch these things, it's like kind of mind numbing and like craze inducing. So they talk through sort of that experience, and then they made some videos and visuals out of this project. This is linked to from here. I definitely recommend giving it a read because I'm not really doing it justice, but it's a pretty interesting project, and I think it talks about labor, who's being forced to make these things, who's watching them, is anyone watching them, or is it just a machine watching them, those sort of things. And maybe somewhat tied to that project is this project by Mimi Onueho. I am probably butchering that name, and I'm very sorry. This is a project on what data are we not tracking, or what data are we not collecting. So this was a site installation, and the idea here is that we're tracking so much data about all these various things, but what are we missing, or what aren't we thinking about? And I think that's something worthwhile as we begin to make our own data sets to think about, what are we leaving out, what are we keeping in, what biases do those entail? Gender Shades was like probably a pretty big project maybe a year or two ago. It was managed and accomplished by these folks, many of whom are now very prominent people in the AI ethics world. So I definitely recommend checking out their names if you're not familiar with it. The idea behind Gender Shades was that they wanted to look at some of the bigger face classifying data sets and understand error rates, where they work well and where they don't. And spoiler, which maybe isn't a shocker to anyone, they work really well on white men and less so on other genders, on other races, those sort of things. And I think this highlights that, because so many of these projects are made by white men, they tend to work best for them. in some ways supporting white supremacy, supporting these types of things, reinforcing, the power structures that already exist. And again, I think this is just a powerful thing and something that we should always think about when we're building our own data sets. There are so many face projects here that it's like hard to sort of like talk about all of them. Exposing AI is one that was released recently, and this project sort of goes into detail about many of these data sets are built from Flickr because Flickr has a Creative Commons license that users can apply. So if you add like, yes, I'm okay with someone using this for a remix or something, researchers can then pull that data and say that they're using it legally. Problem is, I don't think that most people who are using Flickr and uploading their faces and saying like, yeah, use this for a remix, are thinking that they're going to be used for surveillance technology or other tools. So again, so much of critical AI stuff looks at data sets because data sets are really the heart of how machine learning models train and other things. So again, there's so many projects in this area that I think are worth checking out. And if you have more that you think I should look at, please let me know. But I think it's an interesting area of, how do you present this? How do you make the case for these things being the wrong way to go? And how do you also project a path for good use cases? This project is near and dear to my heart. And as I probably mentioned in a couple of projects before, like this is where I want you to sort of take a stand or work off this stuff, which is AI is a part of a tool chain, right? Like all of us are creative in different ways and all of us have our own skill sets, and we want to reinforce that and not, I don't want everyone to just make a StyleGAN model and be like, now I'm an AI artist. I want you to think about how this can work into your own workflow or your own craft. This is a really great example of a person called From Fran, and they use Runway to train a model on their own pottery. And then they also, after they were output, they started making some of the pottery based on these images. If you're familiar with Robin Sloan's work, Robin Sloan has this theory of what he calls flip-flopping, which is like converting physical things into digital and back to physical. And I think this is a great example of that, where, you can use these things as inspiration to do something else. Another project from Mimi here is, I believe that this works as a classifier system. So it's an installation project. 2 people walk up to it, and if the machine learning model decides you two are similar, it lights up. If they don't, it doesn't light up. Again, it probably gets to a lot of critical thinking about, what are these machine models seeing as sort of similar? It's probably likely race-based or photographic-based, and that can be a problem. Another Robbie Barrett project here, this time with Mushba. They trained a lot of images or data sets from Runway images, and by Runway I mean not Runway the tool, Runway as in Runway models. So many word issues today. So I think there's just some really interesting concepts here. The idea is this, with this particular image, this model was trained on probably something where like a lot of people were walking with handbags. And in this particular image, they decided the model decided to remove the handbag. So it almost looks like this bag is attached to this person's leg. And so they went ahead and decided to make that. So they made a prototype of pants with a big pocket. And Robbie sort of like continued on with this work, continued to sort of like generate new sort of runway model fashion. And I believe maybe this time last year or maybe earlier, he actually did a project with Acne to sort of generate some machine learning inspired fashion. And April is a student of mine. She started this project right around when COVID started. The idea here being that she had lots of her own sketches. When she would travel, she would draw what she saw. So she went back and pulled out all those sketches, and then also collected a bunch of images or photographs from those places, and then sort of trained this sort of half and half model on them. And what I love about this is, one, it's clearly a good timing for a project, right? Like the idea of we can't travel, so we're letting a machine create pieces or places for us. But I also love the idea of splitting this up and trying to see where the machine connects the dots or where it doesn't. And this could have been a great project by itself, but April took it one step further, which is sort of took the drawings the machines generated and redrew them on a pen plotter. So again, sort of that flip-flopping ping-pong experience of taking stuff in and taking stuff out. So I haven't shown any project with faces, or when I have, it's only been in a critical perspective. And there's a reason for that. The reason is sort of twofold. One, faces are kind of boring today. That sounds weird to say, but faces actually really aren't that interesting to a machine learning model. They tend to be fairly similar. Our faces are not that different. Our eyes are slightly different colors, or we have different hair color, or our skin tone is a little different. But it's not what I would describe as a particularly diverse data set. So it's kind of, I don't want to say it's been completely solved, but I do think like so much of the work that we do today, or that machine learning artists or machine learning researchers work off of, is face data, because the data sets exist, because it's a cool project. It gets people going ooh and ah when they see it. Um, but it's just kind of, I don't want to say it's overkill, but it's like it gets a lot of use. So I will generally push people away from thinking about face data sets. The second reason is I think it has a lot of privacy and security implications. As we talk about these things, it's like we really do need to think about what this means for the people who have provided their faces to this data. So it's definitely something I think about. It's a problem we're going to have with security and surveillance. So I'll generally, push people to avoid face data sets and other things unless you have a really good concept for it. I'll never tell anyone they can't do anything. Well, there's probably a couple things I would tell you can't do. But if you have a really good concept for a face data set, I'm happy to talk through it. But I think it tends to be a minefield of ethical problems. And also just it's not that exciting of a training problem from a technical side of things. So, I'll push people away from it, but if you want to push back, you're more than welcome to. So that covers a large number of categories that I wanted to talk about. It doesn't cover everything, clearly. If you are looking for additional inspiration, I can also say there's two big sites that I recommend folks check out. The first is ML Art. I believe it's from one of the folks at Google in Europe. I forget exactly the team they're on, but it collects it's probably at some 600 projects at this point of cool ML art pieces. And then also the NeurIPS for the past 4 or 5 years has done workshops around AI creativity, and they've amassed a pretty nice collection of work in there. So definitely recommend checking those out. I will obviously say I think these are very Western focused, based on who's producing them and where who's submitting work to them. They're also probably, quite honestly, very white. I think that is a problem because of just who has access to these materials today, and who's taught them, and hopefully that changes on the whole. But we'll see. I'm excited to sort of see what other folks do with these things that are not, white Americans or white Europeans. But we might be a little bit of time off before everyone is sort of a level playing field to that access. So obviously this covered some very high level topics and projects for me. If you have additional work you want to share, or if you want to argue with me about what Surrealism is or what Cubism is, I'm more than happy to do that. Please drop a note in the video chat, or come to one of my classes and fight me. We don't actually need to fight, but this is early stages for me to think about this stuff too. So I'm really excited to sort of hear how people respond to it, and then also where I made horrible mistakes that I need to apologize for. So yeah, I'm happy to do that. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much, and I hope to talk to you soon.